Have you ever stopped to think about this? For any single living thing, reproduction is, well, it's completely optional. And not just optional, it is one of the most energy-draining things an organism can possibly do. And yet, it's what defines life. This, right here, is the reproduction paradox, and it's a puzzle at the very heart of biology.
So why do they do it? It seems like such a simple question, right? The obvious answer is just because that's what living things do. But, if you start looking at it from the perspective of an individual just trying to survive day to day, that logic completely falls apart.
And this is where we get to the core of the problem. We tend to think about essential life processes, eating, breathing, that kind of stuff, as things that keep an individual alive. But reproduction, it just doesn't fit in that category. Not at all.
I mean, look at this breakdown. On one side, you've got nutrition, respiration, excretion. These are totally non-negotiable. If you stop doing any of them, your life is over. But an organism can live a long, perfectly healthy life without ever reproducing. For its own personal survival, it is completely unnecessary.
And get this, it's not just that it's optional, it's that it is incredibly costly. I mean, think about it. Creating new life, whether it's laying an egg, growing a seed, or carrying a pregnancy, it just burns a massive amount of energy that could have been used for the parent's own survival.
So this brings us right to the big question, the one that stumps you for a second. From a single organism's point of view, why on earth would you waste all that precious energy on something that gives you zero direct benefit for staying alive? It just doesn't seem to make any sense.
Okay, so to solve this puzzle, we have to do a complete 180 on how we're looking at it. The answer isn't about one single animal or one single tree. We've got to zoom out, way out, and look at the entire population, the whole species.
And here's the big shift. The whole point of reproduction, the logic behind it, isn't about making sure one organism survives. It's about making sure the entire group, the species itself, continues on.
And this actually leads us to our first huge clue. The very reason we're even aware of other species, the reason we can see a whole forest of trees or an ocean full of fish, is a direct result of reproduction. Just think about that for a second. Reproduction leads to huge numbers, to abundance, and that abundance is what makes a species noticeable. Without all those individuals, a species would be practically invisible to us, just a blip in the ecosystem.
Let's do a little thought experiment. Imagine a world where a certain species existed, but there was only one of them, just a single, unique individual that never reproduced. Seriously, picture it. A single, one-of-a-kind creature living out its life somewhere on this giant planet. What are the odds we would have ever found it, or studied it, or even known it was ever there? Pretty much zero, right? A single organism is just a biological footnote. A cool story, maybe. But when it reproduces and creates a huge population, then the species becomes a real force. It has a presence. It matters. Okay, but it's not just about cranking out huge numbers. There's another piece of the puzzle here, and it's just as important. Reproduction isn't just about making more things. It's about making more things that are fundamentally alike. Think about it for a second. When you see two dogs playing in a park, how do you know they're both dogs? It sounds almost silly to ask, but the answer is actually key to this whole thing. At the most basic level, we identify a species because its members share characteristics. We group them together because they look and act alike. It's like they're all built from the same biological blueprint. And that's the magic of reproduction, isn't it? It's the mechanism for copying that blueprint. A redwood tree makes seeds that grow into new redwood trees. A starfish releases eggs that become new starfish. It's this incredible process of creating more of the same. So let's put it all together. Here's the logic. An organism spends its own energy to reproduce. In doing so, it creates new individuals who look and act just like it. And because they're all so similar, the pattern, the very essence of that species, gets to continue on. And there it is. That's the solution to the paradox. An individual doesn't reproduce for its own good, but for the good of its entire species. It's a trade-off. The individual's personal energy is traded for the continuation of its kind. You could almost call it a form of collective immortality. Which leaves us with one last, kind of mind-bending question to think about. When we say life, what are we really talking about? Is it the single organism that's here today and gone tomorrow? Or is it the timeless pattern, the blueprint that keeps getting passed on generation after generation? Something to chew on.
Have you ever just stopped and thought about how life actually continues? How does a single tiny cell eventually become a person, a plant, or any living thing? Well, today we're going to dive right into that incredible journey of how life makes more life. So, let's start with a really big question. We tend to think of reproduction as just making a copy of something. But is it an exact copy? Like putting something on a photocopier and getting a perfect duplicate? The answer, as you're about to see, is way more interesting than that. All right, to get to the bottom of this not-so-perfect copy idea, we've got to start small. And I mean really small. We're talking microscopic level, right down to the blueprint that builds every single living thing. And that blueprint is, of course, DNA. Think of it like the ultimate instruction manual. It's packed inside the nucleus of pretty much every cell, and it holds all the information needed to build the proteins that make you, you. It's the master plan for your entire body. So, when a cell wants to reproduce, it follows a pretty simple three-step dance. First, it has to copy that entire DNA instruction manual. Then, it makes all the other stuff a cell needs to function. And finally, poof, it just splits right down the middle into two new cells. Seems simple enough, right? Well, here's where it gets really interesting. In the real world of biology, nothing is ever 100% perfect. Unlike a machine, these biochemical processes aren't totally reliable. When that DNA is getting copied, little mistakes can happen. And the result of those tiny imperfections is huge. The two new cells are super similar, but they're not absolutely identical. There are subtle differences between them. And this isn't a bug, it's a feature. This is where something called variation comes from, and it's the engine for all the incredible diversity of life we see on our planet. So having this built-in variation is amazing for the long-term survival of a species. But there is a catch. On its own, this process of creating variations one little error at a time, well, it's pretty slow. Which naturally leads us to the next big question. If variation is so great, is there a way to hit the fast-forward button? Can we speed up the process of creating new and different individuals? And the answer is a big yes. While that slow and steady variation you get from asexual reproduction is good, sexual reproduction is what really supercharges the whole thing. Think about it. You're taking the DNA and all the existing variations from two different parents and shuffling them together. You get brand new, totally novel combinations with every single offspring. But hold on a second. If you just combined all the DNA from two parents, wouldn't the baby have double the amount? That would be a mess. But nature has this incredibly clever solution called meiosis. It's a special kind of cell division that creates the reproductive cells, like sperm and eggs, with only half the usual amount of DNA. That way, when they combine, the new individual gets the exact right amount. It's absolutely brilliant. Okay, so we've got the basic concepts down. Now, let's see how this all plays out in the real world. And for that, we don't need to look any further than the plants and flowers probably right outside your window. The real action all happens right inside the flower. You've got the stamen, which is the male part. It's what makes all the pollen. Then right in the middle, you have the pistil. That's the female part. And at the bottom of the pistil is the ovary, which holds the little ovules, each one containing an egg cell. And the whole process is just fascinating. First, a grain of pollen has to land on the top of the pistil. From there, it actually grows a tiny tube all the way down into the ovary. The male germ cell travels down that tube, finds the female egg cell, and fuses with it. And boom, that fertilized ovule starts developing into a seed, which holds the blueprint for a whole new plant. Okay, so let's shift gears from plants to us, to humans. We also use sexual reproduction, obviously, but before any of that can happen, our bodies have to go through this really remarkable transformation to get ready. That transformation is called puberty, and it brings a whole lot of changes. Some things happen to everyone, right? Like new hair growing in places like armpits and the genital area, and our skin getting oilier. But then there are very specific changes. For girls, breast size increases and menstruation starts. For boys, voices get deeper, facial hair starts to grow. It's basically a complete rewiring of the body for adulthood. So what puberty really is this specific window of time. It happens right as our overall body growth starts to slow down from childhood. The body then shifts all that energy and resources into maturing the reproductive system, getting it ready for its incredibly important job. And that whole maturation process is all about developing these highly specialized organs. So let's take a quick look at the male and female reproductive systems. Okay, in the male system, the testes are the main players. They're responsible for producing sperm and the hormone testosterone. From there, the sperm travel through a tube called the vas deferens, and along the way, glands add fluid to create semen, and finally, it all exits through the urethra. Now, the female system is designed to be the perfect counterpart. The ovaries produce the eggs. Each month, an egg travels down the fallopian tube toward the uterus. The uterus is this incredible organ that's designed to house and protect a developing embryo if fertilization happens. And how does that embryo get what it needs to grow? Through one of the most amazing structures in all of biology, the placenta. It's this special disc of tissue that embeds in the wall of the uterus and acts as a total lifeline, letting nutrients and oxygen pass from the mother to the embryo and taking waste back out. It's incredible. And this whole unbelievable process, from a single fertilized egg to a brand new, fully formed human baby, takes, on average, about 9 months to complete. A journey that really puts things into perspective and leads us to our next topic. Because, of course, a process as important and profound as creating a new life is about so much more than just the biology. It brings a lot of new choices, and with those choices come really important responsibilities. So, because the sexual act can lead to pregnancy, a lot of different methods have been developed to manage that. You can think of them in a few main categories. You have mechanical barriers, like condoms, that just physically block the sperm. There are hormonal methods, like the pill, that prevent an egg from being released in the first place. You've got devices that are placed in the uterus, and then there are even surgical options for a permanent solution. The point is, there are lots of ways for people to take control of their reproductive health. You know, this ability to choose if and when to have children doesn't just change individual lives, it has a huge impact on whole societies. Reproduction, after all, is how populations grow. And that brings us to a final, really big question to think about. When we look at issues like poverty in the world, what's the real cause? Is it simply that there are too many people for the resources we have? Or is it more about how we share and distribute those resources? Is it a numbers problem or an inequality problem? There's no simple answer, but it's a question that connects the biology we just talked about directly to the kind of world we all want to live in.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into a fundamental secret to survival. It's a superpower, really, but it's not found in being perfect. It's actually found in the power of being different.
So, let's just dive right into the big question. We tend to think of consistency as a strength, right? But in the huge, sprawling story of life on this planet, is being a perfect copy of your parents really the best strategy? Or could it actually be a species' greatest vulnerability?
To get to the bottom of that, first we need to understand how life thrives when everything is going just right. You know, when the world is stable, predictable, and a species has found its absolute perfect fit.
So, every population of organisms has what scientists call a niche. The best way to think about it is like its perfect home address and its job description, all rolled into one. It's where all of its traits, its body, its behaviors, how it gets food, are just a perfect match for the environment around it.
And the key to holding on to that perfect spot, it's all about being able to reproduce consistently. I mean, accurately copying your DNA generation after generation makes sure that your kids have the exact same winning features that let them thrive. This is how consistency leads directly to stability for a species.
That stability is a massive advantage, for a while. But here's the twist. What happens when that perfect, stable world suddenly isn't so stable anymore? The truth is, ecosystems are anything but permanent. Those perfect little niches can be completely upended by forces way beyond any organism's control. Temperatures can skyrocket or plummet, water levels can shift like crazy, or, a giant rock from space could come crashing down. The world is always in flux. So here's the crucial point. A population of perfect identical copies is actually incredibly fragile. Think about it. If every single individual is perfectly suited for just one set of conditions, and those conditions just vanish, the entire population could face extinction. There's just no plan B.
So, if being a perfect copy is a potential dead end, how does life solve this massive problem? Well, it turns out nature has a secret weapon for long-term survival.
The answer is actually pretty beautiful, and it lies in something that, on the surface, just looks like a mistake, like an error in the copying process. But it's not an error at all. It's the key to resilience.
Now, this comparison right here really lays out the stakes so clearly. On the one hand, you have a uniform population. Everyone's the same. When a crisis hits, it's basically all or nothing. But on the other side, you've got a varied population. And in that variety, in all those small differences, that's where you find a chance. A chance for someone, anyone, to have just the right stuff to make it through.
This whole idea gets so much clearer when you see it in a real-world example. So let's look at a powerful little story of survival, starring some microscopic heroes.
This illustrates the whole thing brilliantly. Okay, so picture a population of bacteria, totally happy in their nice temperate water niche. Then, bam, a crisis. The water temperature suddenly shoots up. Most of the bacteria, since they're perfectly suited for cooler water, they die off. But what if a few individuals in that population had a slight variation, a tiny random mutation that just so happens to make them resistant to heat? Well, they survive. And those survivors get to reproduce, passing on their heat resistance, and just like that, the species lives on.
So, let's boil all this down. What's the ultimate takeaway from this powerful, fundamental principle of nature?
When it comes to the long-term survival of any species over these vast stretches of time, there is one single, absolutely essential ingredient. And it is not perfection.
It's this variation. It's not about being the perfect specimen for today's world. It's about having enough difference, enough diversity scattered throughout a population so that when the world inevitably changes tomorrow, someone is ready. Variation is life's ultimate insurance policy for the future.
And look, this principle isn't just about bacteria or ancient life forms. It's a fundamental law of biology that has implications literally everywhere. Which kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on. In our own complex and constantly changing world, could it be that diversity, in all its forms, is actually our single greatest asset for survival?
Welcome. Today, we're going on a little safari, but not to some faraway jungle. Nope, we're diving into a hidden world, a bustling, invisible kingdom of life that's thriving right under our noses, literally, in our own kitchens. So, what if I told you that your kitchen is basically a secret, tiny metropolis for microscopic life? Well, today, we're putting on our detective hats. We're going to run a couple of super simple investigations to uncover the reproductive secrets of the little organisms that call your pantry home. All right, our first case file. This one takes us to a really common baking ingredient, yeast. You know, it's a tiny, single-celled organism, and we're about to give it the perfect environment to see exactly how it makes more of itself. Okay, here's our setup, and it's super easy. First, we create a nice sugary feast for the yeast, keep it cozy and warm, and just let it do its thing. After an hour or two, we'll sneak a drop under the microscope to see what our little suspects have been up to. So, any guesses? What do you think we're going to find in there? I mean, with plenty of food, warmth, and water, the conditions are absolutely perfect for something to happen. How does a single little cell even begin to reproduce? Let's go examine the evidence. And here it is, our first clue. Through the microscope, we can see the original yeast cells, but they've got these tiny little bumps growing right off of them. These are called buds, and each one is a brand new daughter cell growing directly from its parent. Pretty soon, it'll just break away and start its own life. It's an incredibly efficient way to multiply. Okay, time for our second case. We're shifting gears now, moving from a liquid solution to a solid surface. And we're looking at something a little different from our single-celled yeast. Our key piece of evidence? A simple slice of bread. This investigation, though, requires a bit more patience. The procedure here is even simpler. We just dampen a slice of bread, tuck it away in a cool, dark spot, and then we wait. We're going to check on it with a magnifying glass for about a week and see what starts to appear on the surface. So after a few days, what are we expecting to see? Come on, we've all left a loaf of bread out for a little too long, right? We know what's coming. What kind of life is about to take over this starchy piece of real estate? And there it is. You see those fuzzy patches of mold? They start as just tiny little spots and then spread outwards. If you get a magnifying glass, you can see it's actually this whole network of tiny interconnected threads spreading across the bread, almost like a web. Okay, detectives, our investigations are complete. We've gathered all our evidence from the sugary water and the moist bread, and we've seen two totally different ways that things can grow. So now, let's put our findings side by side and figure out what it all means. So on one hand, we've got our yeast, a single cell that reproduces by budding, a process so small we needed a microscope. And on the other hand, we've got mold, which spreads out as a whole network, something we could see growing with just a magnifying glass. Two organisms, two completely different strategies for taking over. And this brings us to the central mystery of our whole investigation. Why? Why are the methods so different? Why doesn't yeast grow like a web? And why doesn't mold just pop out little buds? The answer is right here, and it's where everything is going to click into place. This one sentence, this is it. This is the solution to our entire mystery. The way an organism makes more of itself isn't random at all. It's directly tied to its most basic structure, what we call its body design. So what is body design exactly? It's just the way an organism is built. Think about it. Yeast is just one single solitary cell, so for it, budding is a super direct and efficient way to copy itself. But bread mold, it's a whole network of threads, so its method of reproduction is, naturally, to spread that network. Here's the most important takeaway, the crucial point. An organism's form dictates its function. It's that simple. Its physical structure determines how it lives, how it eats, and, as we just saw, how it reproduces. The single-celled yeast buds, the web-like mold spreads. It's a fundamental rule of biology playing out right in our kitchen. And that leaves us with one final fascinating thought. We've just seen two totally different reproductive strategies just by looking in our kitchen. So if every organism's design dictates its strategy for life, just imagine the sheer variety of incredible designs and functions out there in the wider world, all waiting to be discovered. What else is hiding in plain sight?
When you think about it, at its most fundamental level, life is just really, really good at making copies of itself. It's this amazing microscopic art form, a kind of dance of division. And today, we're going to take a closer look at this art of splitting.
This is the big question, right? How in the world does one tiny little organism all by itself become two? Or, as we'll see, a whole lot more. On the surface, it sounds simple, but the answer, well, it unlocks this incredible world of different strategies.
So the official term for this whole process is fission. And for a single-celled organism, this isn't just about growing bigger. This is reproduction. The act of dividing the cell is literally how the next generation is born. If you get this one word, you've got the key to everything we're about to explore.
All right, so where do we begin? Let's start with a classic example, our baseline case, the humble amoeba. It's going to show us fission in its most pure, most straightforward form.
And the key phrase to understand the amoeba is right here, in any plane. Seriously, think about it like a ball of Play-Doh. You can slice it top to bottom, side to side, diagonally, it doesn't matter. You'll still get two halves. The amoeba is just like that. It has this incredible flexibility because it doesn't really have a top or a bottom. Any direction works.
So, this whole process is called binary fission, and it's basically a three-step dance. First, the parent cell just gets ready. Then, the most important part, the nucleus, the cell's brain, makes a copy of itself and divides. And finally, the rest of the cell body just pinches in the middle until, poof, you've got two brand new identical individuals. It's simple, it's elegant, and it is incredibly effective.
Okay, so that was the simple version. But what happens when life gets a little more organized, when just splitting randomly won't work? Well, our next organism introduces a crucial new element into the mix, a rule.
And this slide just lays out the difference perfectly. We're going from the amoeba's anything-goes approach to Leishmania's definite orientation. All of a sudden, the direction of the split really, really matters. This isn't random anymore. It's a very specific, organized procedure. So why the rule? What's the deal?
Well, Leishmania has this little whip-like tail at one end. And to make sure that both of the new cells get one of these structures, the split has to happen in a very precise way. And this isn't just some weird biological fact. This tiny parasite is actually the cause of a serious disease called Kala-Azar. Its very precise, very organized way of reproducing is part of what makes it so successful and so dangerous.
So far, the math has been pretty easy. One cell becomes two. But nature, it loves to experiment. So what if we just change the math completely? Let's meet an organism that does exactly that. Plasmodium. This quote, it says it all, doesn't it? From one, many. We're not talking about just making a single copy anymore. This is a strategy built on creating overwhelming numbers. Exactly. This is Plasmodium, the parasite that causes malaria. And it basically takes the one becomes two rulebook and throws it right out the window.
It uses something called multiple fission, creating a ton of new daughter cells all at the same time. The process here is just fascinating. Instead of the nucleus splitting just once, the nucleus inside the parent cell just goes wild. It divides over and over and over again. Then, once you've got all these little nuclei, the cell body splits all at once, releasing this absolute flood of new cells. It's an incredible strategy for multiplying as fast as possible.
Phew. Okay, so from the super flexible amoeba to the rule-following leishmania to the explosive plasmodium, we've seen 3 totally different ways to do the same thing. So let's just take a second and recap the incredible diversity we've just seen. This table just sums it up so nicely. Look at this. Amoeba and leishmania both use binary fission, 1 to 2, but one has total freedom while the other follows strict rules. And then you've got plasmodium over here playing a whole different game with multiple fission, going from 1 to many in a single burst. 3 organisms, 3 totally brilliant solutions to the same problem.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? It's that even simple life is unbelievably complex. Fission isn't just one thing. It's a whole toolkit. You can have binary or multiple, random or organized. And this is just fission. We didn't even touch on other things like how yeast reproduces by budding. The ingenuity out there is just endless.
And that's what I want to leave you with. We've just seen 3 different, clever solutions to the single most important problem: survival. So if there's this much creativity and ingenuity in the simple act of one cell splitting, just imagine what other incredible strategies are at play all around us, in every single form of life on this planet.
You know, when we think about how life reproduces, we often picture these really complex, elaborate processes. But what if the easiest way to multiply was just to break apart? It sounds almost too simple to be real, but today we're going to dive into fragmentation, a method that does exactly that.
So that's the big question, right? Could just shattering into a bunch of pieces actually be the most efficient way for an organism to make more of itself? It sounds wild, but for some forms of life, the answer is a definite yes.
And to see this in action, we're going to look at an amazing little organism called Spirogyra. You've probably seen this stuff before without even knowing it. It's that stringy green algae you find in freshwater ponds. Now, it is multicellular, but its body is super simple. And that simplicity, well, that's the whole secret to its reproductive superpower.
So how does it work? Honestly, the process is so straightforward, it's beautiful. There are no complicated rituals, no searching for a mate. The Spirogyra just grows up, it matures, and then it literally just breaks into pieces. And each one of those pieces, each fragment, just grows into a brand new, complete individual. It's multiplication boiled down to its absolute bare essentials.
And there's no catch here. The source material spells it out perfectly. It simply breaks up into smaller pieces upon maturation, and then those pieces grow into new individuals. That's it. It's the perfect strategy for an organism that isn't built with a lot of intricate, specialized parts.
Okay, so this is where your brain probably goes next, right? If nature has this incredibly simple reproductive hack, why can't more complex creatures, like you and me, do the same thing? Why can't we just, break off an arm and have it grow into a new person? Well, the answer gets into the huge difference between simple life and complex life. And it all boils down to this one fundamental contrast. For simple organisms like Spirogyra, their body is kind of like a random collection of cells that all do more or less the same thing. But for us, we're what the source calls a carefully organized situation. We aren't just the jumble of cells. We're an incredibly intricate, highly structured system where everything has its place.
And that massive difference has a name: cell specialization. Think of it like this. In a simple organism, most cells are generalists. They're jacks of all trades. But in a complex organism, like a human, our cells are extreme specialists. We have heart cells, nerve cells, skin cells, and they are experts at their one job, and you can't just swap them around.
And these specialist cells, they don't just work alone, they team up. Groups of similar, specialized cells get together to form tissues. You've got muscle tissue, nervous tissue. Each one is built from cells that are all dedicated to the exact same function.
But we don't stop there. The organization goes another level deeper. These different tissues then come together to build our organs, things like the heart, the lungs, or the brain. Each organ is this complex structure designed for a huge, vital job, and it relies on all its different specialized tissues working together perfectly.
And this part is absolutely crucial. It's not just about having these organs. It's about where they go. A heart has to be in a very definite position, connected to the whole system in a very precise way. Our entire body is just this masterclass in careful, deliberate organization. You can't just wing it. So, you can see why the Spira-Gyra method just completely falls apart for us. In a system that's so carefully put together, you can't just break off a chunk and expect it to regrow a brain and a heart and lungs in all the right places. It would be chaos. It's totally impractical. This means that we complex, multicellular organisms needed a much more sophisticated strategy to reproduce. If you can't just break off a piece and call it a day, how in the world do you build a new, fully organized person from scratch?
Well, the solution actually brings us right back to that same core idea we've been talking about this whole time: specialization. The game plan is to assign different jobs to different types of cells, and that includes the very specific and very important job of making a new organism.
So, what did complex life do? It evolved a dedicated, superstar cell type whose one and only job is reproduction. This isn't just any old cell. This is a cell that holds all the potential, all the information, to build an entire organism from the ground up.
And this one reproductive cell type has some serious superpowers. First, it's capable of growing. Second, it can proliferate, which just means making tons and tons of copies of itself. And third, and this is the most mind-blowing part, it's capable of creating all the other cell types. It can make muscle cells, bone cells, brain cells, everything you need to build the tissues, the organs, and the entire new individual.
So in the end, our complexity demanded a much more elegant solution. Instead of just breaking apart, complex life created a single, specialized cell that basically acts as a microscopic architect, holding the blueprint for an entire organism. Which kind of leaves us with one last, really fascinating question to ponder. If one cell can do all of that, what other incredible possibilities are still locked away inside our own biology?
All right, today we are diving into one of nature's most mind-blowing abilities, a true biological marvel. We're talking about regeneration, what I'm calling nature's ultimate superpower. So let me start with a wild idea. Forget just healing a cut or even regrowing a finger. What if you could regrow an entire, brand new you from just a small piece of yourself? I know, it sounds like something straight out of a superhero movie, doesn't it? Well, for some creatures out there, this isn't science fiction at all. It's just another Tuesday. So, first up, nature's superpower. We're going to unlock the secrets of how some life forms pull off this incredible feat of biological engineering. What are we really talking about when we say regeneration? Well, officially, it's the ability of a fully developed organism to create a brand new, complete individual from one of its own body parts. This isn't just about patching up a wound. We're talking about full-on creation from a fragment. To see this in action, we need a champion, a prime example of this incredible power. So let's meet a true master of regeneration, the planaria flatworm. And just how extreme is this ability? Well, for simple animals like the planaria, you can literally cut them into multiple pieces, and each and every one of those pieces has the potential to grow into a complete new worm. It is absolutely astounding. So, how does this actually look? Let's walk through it. You start with one single, complete planaria. Then it gets broken apart. Let's say we cut it into 3 pieces. Now the magic happens. Each of those pieces starts to regrow whatever it's missing. The head grows a new tail, the tail grows a new head, and that little piece from the middle, it grows both. And finally, you're left with 3 separate, complete individuals, all from that one original. It's incredible. But the big question is, how, right? How is this even possible? To understand that, we need to zoom way, way in. Let's meet the cellular construction crew that makes it all happen. The answer isn't actual magic, even though it really feels like it. The real secret to this superpower is hidden deep inside the cells themselves. The heroes of this story are a group of what we call specialized cells. You can think of them like a master construction crew on standby. Their very first job when an injury happens is to proliferate, which is just a fancy way of saying they multiply, and multiply fast, to create a huge mass of new cellular building blocks. Now, this isn't just chaos, it's a highly organized sequence of events. First, you get that proliferation we just talked about, which creates a new mass of cells. Then comes the really amazing part, differentiation. This is where those generic cells get assigned specific jobs, changing to become skin or nerves or muscle. And all of this happens in an organized sequence we call development, which ultimately builds a whole new organism from the ground up. So you might be thinking, wait a minute, creating new individuals, isn't this just a really weird form of reproduction? And you know what? That's a great question. It brings us to our final section, the crucial distinction between regeneration and reproduction. Let's break this down side by side to make it crystal clear. Regeneration, like we've seen, is all about growing new individuals from body parts, and it's usually a response to being cut or broken. You can think of it as an emergency protocol. Reproduction, on the other hand, that's the normal, everyday biological process for creating new offspring. It's part of the plan, not a response to an accident. This quote really just drives the point home perfectly. Most organisms would not normally depend on being cut up to be able to reproduce. See, regeneration is a survival mechanism. It's an incredible backup plan for sure, but it's not the main way these creatures make the next generation. And that is the key difference. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. We've just seen how a simple little flatworm can regrow its entire body from a mere fragment. The blueprint for a whole new life is held right inside its cells. So the question is, if this tiny organism holds the secret to rebuilding a whole body, what could that mean for the future of human healing? It's something to think about. Thanks for joining me. All right, today we're going to dive into one of nature's wildest tricks. I'm talking about the ability to create a perfect clone. And we're going to see how this tiny little creature, the Hydra, has totally mastered the art of, well, literally growing a copy of itself. I mean, just think about that for a second. What if an animal could make a perfect copy of itself just by growing it? No partner, no complicated rituals, just poof, a new individual sprouts right off the side. Sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, right? But for some creatures, this is just reality. So let's talk about a strange way to reproduce. And the star of our show? It's this tiny little freshwater animal called the Hydra. And let me tell you, it has absolutely perfected this fascinating process. And the secret? Well, it all comes down to some very special cells. Okay, so what is budding exactly? Well, the official definition is that it's a way of reproducing where a new individual just develops from an outgrowth on the parent. And the key to this whole thing, the absolute magic ingredient, is those regenerative cells. You can think of them like the ultimate building blocks that make this whole cloning thing possible. So the first cells divide. How does this whole journey start? Where does this new life begin? Well, it's not random at all. It all kicks off at one very specific pre-programmed spot on the parent Hydra's body. So here's the spark of life, step by step. First, those incredible regenerative cells get the memo, and they all start gathering together in one place. Step 2, they just start dividing and dividing and dividing. It's this repeated cell division that, step 3, starts to form a little bump, an outgrowth, and we call that a bud. This is it, the very first physical sign that a new Hydra is on its way. Now, a clone starts to take shape, and you have to understand, this isn't just a simple lump of cells. Oh no, inside that tiny little outgrowth, a crazy fast transformation is happening. It's basically on the express train to becoming a complete miniature version of its parent, with all the parts it's going to need to survive. It all starts from a simple bump to a tiny individual. Yeah, from that humble little structure, something incredible emerges, a complete tiny organism that is a perfect 100% genetic clone of its parent. And this is where it gets really cool, how it becomes a miniature Hydra. The bud doesn't just inflate like a balloon. Nope, it differentiates. It develops into a tiny individual. It grows all the specialized parts it needs, it sprouts its own little tentacles so it can catch food, and it develops its own mouth so it can eat. And all the while, remember, it is a perfect genetic clone, an exact copy. Okay, so now it's ready for the world. We've got this fully formed miniature Hydra just hanging off its parent. It's got a mouth, it's got tentacles, it's good to go. But there's one last super important step before it can strike out on its own. And this is that moment. The source material says it perfectly. They detach from the parent body and become new independent individuals. It just pops off, it breaks free. And in that one moment, boom, we've gone from one Hydra to 2 separate, totally independent creatures. So what's the aftermath here? Let's compare the parent versus the offspring. For the parent,
Life just goes on. It continues its life, and it can even produce more buds later on. But the offspring? It's a brand new, independent individual. It is genetically identical, a perfect clone, and it's now off to begin its own life. This really shows us the power of regeneration. I mean, what have we really just seen here? It's the incredible power of those regenerative cells in action. They are the engine driving this whole process. And for a creature like the Hydra, this is an amazingly efficient strategy. It lets them just explode in population when the conditions are good. So to put it simply, one organism becomes two. And it does it without a partner, without a seed. All it takes is a simple but incredibly powerful division of its own cells. That's it. And that just leaves us with this really big question to chew on. If one organism can literally build another one from just a handful of its own cells, what are the true limits of life's ability to regenerate and reproduce? Makes you think, doesn't it?
All right, today we're diving into something that sounds like it's straight out of a sci-fi movie. A plant's hidden superpower to literally clone itself. And the wild thing is, it's not science fiction at all. It's happening all around us, in our gardens, on farms, and hey, maybe even in your kitchen pantry right now.
I bet you've seen this before. You forget about a potato for a little too long, and you come back to find it started sprouting these weird little green shoots. Well, that right there, that's the superpower we're talking about, in action. There are no seeds, no soil, just a brand new plant starting to grow from the old one. So how on earth is that even possible?
To get how this works, we need to peel back the curtain and look at the science behind this incredible feat. Let's uncover the plant's secret power.
The official name for this whole process is vegetative propagation. And really, all it means is that plants can do something amazing that most animals can't. They can use parts of themselves, a piece of a stem, a bit of root, or even just a leaf, to grow an entirely new, independent plant. It's basically nature's own copy and paste function.
So that's the fancy scientific term for it. But what does it actually look like in the real world? Let's check out a few examples of these DIY clones in action. And these are things you can totally try at home.
Let's go right back to our sprouting potato. As this little experiment shows, the only pieces that actually start to grow are the ones with those little notches or buds. And why is that? Because those buds are packed with these powerhouse cells that hold the complete genetic blueprint, the entire instruction manual to grow a whole new potato plant.
But potatoes are just the beginning. I mean, some plants are way more dramatic about it. Take the bryophyllum plant, for example. It grows these tiny, perfectly formed baby plants, we call them plantlets, right on the edges of its leaves. And when they're big enough, they just drop off and start growing a new life in the soil below. How cool is that? Here's another classic example, one that you might have done without even realizing what it was called. You just snip a piece of a money plant, stick it in a glass of water, and that's it. In a few days, that little stem will start to push out new roots and leaves, becoming a whole new plant. It's really that simple.
So, this is a pretty neat biological trick, right? But why does it really matter to us? Well, as it turns out, this plant's superpower has huge implications. It's transformed everything from our backyards to our grocery stores, and it's actually a cornerstone of modern agriculture. There are 3 really big advantages to using vegetative propagation in farming. First off, it's way faster. Second, it lets us grow plants that have actually lost their ability to make seeds. And third, it guarantees perfect consistency every single time. Let's break those down real quick.
Okay, first up, speed. If you try to grow an apple tree from a tiny seed, you could be waiting years, literally years, before you ever see a single piece of fruit. But if you take a cutting from a grown-up tree, you can get fruit so much sooner. It's like a massive shortcut for farmers.
And for some plants, it's not just a shortcut, it's the only way. Think about the bananas you get at the grocery store. They don't have seeds, right? That's because pretty much all commercial bananas are propagated this way. Without this technique, many of the fruits we love, like certain types of bananas, oranges, and grapes, and even flowers like roses, would be almost impossible to find.
This brings us to the third big advantage, consistency. Because the new plant is a genetic clone of its parent, a farmer knows exactly what they're going to get. If the parent plant grew amazing, sweet, juicy apples, then every single one of its clones will grow those exact same sweet, juicy apples. It's the key to having predictable, reliable crops we can count on.
So, we've seen how nature does it, and we've seen how we've been using it in farming for centuries. But what happens when we take this natural superpower and bring it into a high-tech lab? Well, that's where we get into the future of propagation.
Scientists have taken the basic idea of vegetative propagation, you know that a small piece of a plant can regrow into a whole new one, and they've pushed it to its absolute limit. This incredible technique is known as tissue culture.
Now, it might sound really complicated, but the process is just a super-powered version of what we've already learned. Scientists take just a few cells from the growing tip of a plant, where all that powerful growth tissue is. They put those cells in a special gel to feed them, and they start to divide and form this little blob of cells called a callus. Then, by adding specific hormones, they can basically tell that callus to grow into tiny plantlets, which can then be planted in soil.
And the advantages here are just massive. From a single parent plant, you can create thousands upon thousands of clones. And because it's all done in a totally sterile lab, the new plants are completely free of any diseases. This is a really popular way to grow huge numbers of ornamental plants like orchids.
So, we started this journey with a simple potato sprouting in a dark pantry, and we ended up in a lab growing thousands of new plants from just a handful of cells. It really shows you the incredible potential that's locked inside a single plant. And it kind of makes you wonder, if this is what we can do today, what's coming next?
You've seen it, right? 1,000 times. That fuzzy patch on a slice of bread you forgot about. But have you ever stopped and wondered about its secret life? Well, today we're going on a little microscopic journey to uncover the pretty fascinating ways bread mold makes more of itself. I mean, it's a classic kitchen mystery, isn't it? One day your bread is perfectly fine, and the next, bam, it's been taken over by this strange, fuzzy growth. It seriously feels like it just appears out of thin air. But, it's not magic, it's biology. So, to really solve this mystery, we need to shrink down and see what's actually happening on a microscopic level. Let's investigate the hidden structures that allow this stuff to spread so effectively. Okay, so if we were looking under a microscope, the first thing you'd notice are two really distinct parts. They might look like they belong to the same organism, but they have totally different jobs to do. So, at first glance, what do you see? A whole network of these fine, fuzzy threads. This is the main body of the mold, just a colony spreading across the surface of the bread, kind of like the roots of a tiny alien plant. And these threads, they have a name, hyphae. For the common bread mold we're talking about, which is called rhizopus, the hyphae are basically its foundation. They anchor it, they absorb all the nutrients, and they form the entire framework of the thing. But here's the twist. Get this. While the hyphae make up most of what you actually see, they have absolutely nothing to do with making new mold. Their job is all about growth and staying put, not reproduction. For that, we've got to find a completely different structure. And this breaks it down perfectly. So on one side, you've got the hypha, which is the spreading, thread-like body. And then on the other, you see something that looks totally different, these tiny blobs on sticks. Now these are the key to how mold multiplies. So let's zoom in on those blob-on-a-stick things. This is where the real action is. This is the reproductive engine of the entire mold colony. It's a simple, almost funny way to describe a really sophisticated biological function. But inside these tiny structures, the mold is packing everything it needs to create a whole new generation. The sciencey term for these blobs is sporangia. You can think of each sporangium as a tiny little seed pod, just a protective case that's jam-packed with the cells that are going to become new mold colonies. So that brings us right to the heart of the mystery. What's actually in these protective little blobs? What is the secret weapon that lets one tiny patch of mold completely take over an entire loaf of bread? The answer lies in one of nature's most incredible survival tools, the spore. This is the microscopic seed of the mold, and it's built for two things: travel and survival. So spores are the tiny, individual cells packed super tightly inside the sporangia, and every single one of them has the potential to grow into a brand new mold colony. Their superpower, though, is their ability to just wait, sometimes for a really, really long time, until the conditions are just right. And these spores are incredibly tough. They're covered by thick protective walls that shield them from pretty much anything: heat, cold, dryness. This resilience is what lets them float around patiently in the air or just lie there on a surface,
waiting for their moment to strike. This whole process is like a simple mission. First, the sporangium gets mature and just bursts open, releasing thousands of these super lightweight spores into the air. Then, these spores drift on the air currents until they land somewhere new. Now, if that surface happens to be moist and has food, like, say, a slice of bread, the final step begins. The spore germinates, and a new mold colony is born.
So we've just followed the entire journey, from the hyphae all the way to the spore. And what we've actually been watching is a really fundamental and incredibly efficient concept in biology.
1. That's the key number here. This entire super effective process of reproduction can start from just one single parent organism. And that's the whole principle. The entire reproductive game plan of bread mold is built to allow a new generation to pop up from just one individual. No partner needed. And this powerful method has a name you've probably heard before: asexual reproduction. So yeah, when you see mold spreading, what you're really seeing is a classic and incredibly successful example of this strategy in action. So the next time you see mold on your bread, you'll know its secret. You'll see the sporangia, and you'll know all about the incredible journey of the spore. Which kind of leaves us with one final thought. If this single-parent strategy is so powerful for mold, what other life forms are out there using it to conquer their worlds? How does life make more life? It sounds like such a basic question, doesn't it? We see it happening all around us. But when you really start to look closer, you find one of biology's most amazing puzzles. So let's start with something we can all see. Okay, picture a farm. You can have a whole field packed with bulls, but you will never, ever get a single new calf. Something really important is missing from the equation. And it's the exact same story with chickens. A hen, all by herself, can't kickstart a new flock. This is the very first piece of our puzzle. So for so many of the animals we know best, creating that next generation, well, it's not a solo act. It takes a team effort, a partnership, really. And this is what we're going to call the two-parent puzzle. So what's the actual science that explains why this kind of partnership is so incredibly common? The official term is sexual reproduction, and the definition is super specific. It absolutely requires two different individuals, a male and a female, who come together to make a new generation. But here's where the puzzle starts to get really interesting. Because this two-parent system, as common as it is not the only game in town. It's not the only way life knows how to make more life. This lays it out perfectly. On one side, you've got the one-parent approach, where a single individual just makes a copy of itself. And on the other side, you've got the two-parent system we've been talking about. Two totally different strategies for carrying on. And that difference, well, it brings up a really big question. I mean, if some organisms can reproduce all by themselves, which sounds a whole lot easier, why doesn't everything just do it that way? So what is the significance of sexual reproduction? This isn't just about what it is. We want to know why it exists. Why go through all the trouble and energy of finding a partner when some life forms can just make copies? And, significance can mean a lot of things. Is the advantage for the parent, or is it for the offspring? Or maybe the benefit is only something you can see at the level of the whole species, playing out over millions and millions of years. Now, to really understand the why, we've got to flip the whole question around. If sexual reproduction is such a big deal, then what's the problem with the other way of doing things? So, what are the limitations of asexual reproduction? I mean, if making a perfect copy of yourself is so quick and efficient, there has to be a catch, right? There must be some kind of hidden cost to going it alone. Think about it. What happens if you have a huge population of identical clones, and then the environment suddenly changes, or a new disease comes along? Without any variety, a single threat could potentially wipe them all out. Is that a good bet for long-term survival? Probably not.
So you see, this isn't always about finding one single easy answer. Sometimes the most important thing is just to really dig in and understand the question itself. It makes you think about trade-offs, about short-term wins versus long-term survival. Which leaves us with this final thought: one parent versus two. Which is the better strategy for life? Is it about making a perfect copy quickly and efficiently, or is it about creating a brand new combination? One seems to be about winning today. The other is a bet on being able to adapt to whatever comes tomorrow.
The fact that both strategies still exist tells us that in the grand game of life, there's more than one way to win.
All right, let's tackle one of the biggest and honestly most interesting puzzles in all of biology. It's something so fundamental to life that we just take it for granted. But how it all started? Well, that's a profound evolutionary mystery. So let's dive right in.
I mean, this is the core question, right? For literally billions of years, life was doing just fine making clones of itself. Asexual reproduction, just copying yourself, is super simple, it's efficient, it's direct. So why on earth did life go through all the trouble of inventing something as complicated as sex?
The answer really comes down to one word: variation. You can think of genetic variation as a species' ultimate insurance policy. It's not really about protecting any single one of us, but it's absolutely crucial for making sure the entire species can survive whatever the future throws at it.
And this is where we see a huge conflict. You see, the process of copying DNA is incredibly precise. Errors, what we call mutations, they're really rare. Now, for you as an individual, that's a good thing. But for a whole species that's facing, say, a new virus or a change in climate, that super slow pace of change is a major weakness. It desperately needs a way to generate new options, and fast.
This is the big evolutionary question. If just sitting around and waiting for random mistakes in the copying process is way too slow, is there a shortcut, a way to cook up some novelty without waiting for chance? Well, it turns out nature is pretty darn clever.
The solution was to just stop trying to create variation from scratch. Instead, life started mixing and matching what was already out there. The idea was simple, but it was absolutely revolutionary. Let's combine the genetic blueprints of two different individuals.
The logic here is just brilliant. Look, every living thing has its own unique set of genetic quirks, right? Variations that it's accumulated. And here's the key part. Since those individuals are alive and kicking, we know their genetic code is a winning formula. So by combining the DNA from two successful individuals, you instantly create a brand new mix of traits that are already proven to work. It's a massive shortcut to creating diversity.
So the main takeaway is this: sexual reproduction isn't just about making more individuals. At its deepest level, it's a machine for shuffling genes. It's for creating new combinations of traits way faster than random mutation ever could on its own.
But hold on a second. This brilliant solution created a new problem, a massive, potentially catastrophic one. If you just take all the DNA from parent A and all the DNA from parent B and just smash them together, well, the math gets really ugly really fast.
Okay, so let's imagine our first generation. Every individual has a stable, normal amount of DNA in its cells. It's the right amount, everything's balanced, everything's working just as it should. Now, if that generation just combines their full DNA sets to make the next one, suddenly the offspring have double the DNA. This would throw the cell's entire operating system into chaos. And it gets worse. The next generation would have 4 times the amount, then 8 times. It's an out-of-control explosion of genetic material that just can't work.
So this wasn't just some minor bug in the system. This was a deal breaker. It was an existential threat to the whole idea of sexual reproduction. For this newfangled system to have any chance of succeeding, life had to figure out how to combine genes without doubling them every single time. It needed another stroke of genius.
And that solution was a brand new, highly specialized kind of cell division called meiosis. It is, without a doubt, one of the most elegant solutions in all of biology, and it completely solves that doubling problem.
Meiosis is a masterstroke. See, instead of making an exact copy of a cell, it's a process of reduction. It takes a regular cell with the full set of DNA, and through a special kind of division, it creates these reproductive cells, or germ cells, that have precisely half the genetic information.
Think of it this way. All of your regular body cells, they have the full instruction manual. But deep inside specialized reproductive organs, meiosis is creating these germ cells that are, genetically speaking, running on half power. They are intentionally incomplete.
And that's the beautiful symmetry of it all. You get one half set of DNA from one parent, it combines with a half set from the other parent, and voila! The new little organism is restored to having exactly one full, normal set of DNA. Problem solved. The math works perfectly.
But as life got bigger and more complex than just single cells, another layer of strategy was needed. You see, just having 2 identical half cells wasn't quite going to cut it anymore. The new organism needed a serious head start.
I mean, just think about it. A new animal has to grow from a single fertilized egg, a zygote, into this complex creature with muscles and nerves and organs. That incredible construction project takes a massive amount of energy and raw materials, all of which has to be packed into that very first cell. So this challenge led to a great specialization, a kind of division of labor between the germ cells. One of them, the male gamete, became small and mobile, basically a stripped-down delivery vehicle for its half of the DNA. The other, the female gamete, became large and stationary, but it was packed not just with its DNA, but with all the food and energy needed to build a brand new organism. Two very different cells for two very different jobs. And this ancient biological decision, the creation of two distinct kinds of reproductive cells, one built for speed and travel, the other for nurturing and development, this is the fundamental starting point for all the differences we see between male and female bodies, organs, and even behaviors. The whole story really begins right here, with two different strategies for solving one great evolutionary puzzle.
Have you ever stopped to think about the incredible hidden story behind every single piece of fruit you've ever eaten? Well, today we're pulling back the curtain, because it all starts with something you might think is just for decoration, a flower.
Seriously, think about it for a second. When you pick up an apple or a peach, do you ever wonder, how did this even happen? Well, believe it or not, it all started as a bloom. And that transformation from a delicate flower into a ripe piece of fruit is honestly one of nature's coolest magic tricks.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. A flower isn't just there to look pretty. Nope, it's actually a super sophisticated little factory, and it's on a mission that is absolutely essential for the survival of its entire species. So let's meet the key players inside.
That's right. A flower's true purpose is all about reproduction. Tucked away inside all those beautiful petals are the specialized organs that make it all happen. You've got the male part, which is called the stamen, and the female part, the pistil. These two are the stars of our show. Now, here's a fun fact. Not all flowers are built the same way. On the one hand, you have what are called unisexual flowers. Think of plants like papaya or watermelon. Their flowers have either male parts or female parts, but never both. Then you've got bisexual flowers, like a hibiscus, which have both parts conveniently located right there in the same flower.
Let's zoom in on that male part for a second, the stamen. Its entire job, its whole reason for being, is to produce pollen. You know what I'm talking about. It's that fine yellowish dust that gets all over everything in the spring. Well, every single one of those tiny grains holds a male reproductive cell.
And right there in the middle of the flower, we have the female part, the pistil. And wow, it is brilliantly designed. Right at the very top, you've got the stigma, which is sticky, making it the perfect landing pad for pollen. That connects to the style, which is like a stalk, leading down to the swollen base. That base is the ovary, and inside the ovary, you'll find the ovules, each one protecting a single, precious female egg cell.
So, we've met our key players. Now, for anything to actually happen, that pollen from the stamen has to make its way over to the pistil. And this isn't just a short hop. It's an essential mission. It's a journey that pollen has to complete for that flower to fulfill its destiny.
And this journey can go down in one of two ways. First, you've got self-pollination. This is the easy route, where a flower basically pollinates itself. The pollen just has to get from its own stamen to its own stigma. But then, you've got cross-pollination, which is a much bigger adventure, where pollen from one flower has to travel all the way to a completely different flower.
So, how does it make that trip? I mean, pollen grains can't exactly fly on their own. They need a ride. They rely on what we can call nature's messengers. Sometimes it's just the wind that carries them along. Other times a splash of water does the trick. And of course, they're animals. We all think of bees and butterflies. But hey, depending on where you are in the world, it could be birds, bats, even some lizards, all carrying that precious pollen from one flower to the next.
All right, so let's say the pollen has made the trip. It has landed safely on the stigma. The journey is over, right? Not quite. The mission isn't finished yet. In fact, the most critical part of our story, the actual spark of new life, is about to happen deep inside that flower.
So, this is the final hurdle. The pollen grain is sitting right on top of the stigma, but the egg cell it needs to meet is way, way down at the bottom, protected inside the ovary. So how on earth does it get there? How does it bridge that gap?
Okay, this is where things get really wild. Check this out. First, the pollen grain actually grows a tiny tube. It's like it builds its own secret tunnel.
This tube then burrows its way all the way down through the style, heading straight for the ovary. And finally, the male cell travels down through this brand new tube and is delivered right to the doorstep of the female egg cell. It's incredible.
And that moment, that exact moment when the two cells meet and fuse together is called fertilization. This is it. This is the climax of our story. The male cell from the pollen and the female egg cell join forces, combining all their genetic information to create one brand new single cell called a zygote.
And that tiny little zygote, well, it's everything. It holds the complete genetic blueprint for an entirely new plant. A future tree, or a bush, or a vine, it's all packed right there into that one microscopic cell. A new life has officially begun.
Now that fertilization is complete, the flower's whole purpose shifts. It's not about being pretty and attracting pollinators anymore. Now it's all about protection and growth. The flower is about to begin its grand finale, a truly spectacular transformation.
So 3 amazing things start happening all at once. First, that single zygote starts dividing over and over again, developing into a tiny embryo, the little baby plant. At the exact same time, the ovule that's surrounding it hardens up, developing a tough coat and becoming a seed. And finally, the ovary wall around the seed starts to swell up, get fleshy, and ripen, and that is what becomes the fruit.
So you might be wondering, what about all those beautiful parts that started this whole process? The petals, the stamens, all of that? Well, their job is done. They've served their purpose. The plant now puts all of its energy into growing that fruit and protecting that seed, so these other parts just wither away and fall off.
And this is what brings the whole cycle full circle. Eventually, that fruit gets eaten or it falls to the ground, and the seed finds its way into the soil. And when the conditions are just right, enough water, the right temperature, that little embryo inside the seed wakes up and starts to grow. That process is called germination, and it's the moment a brand new plant begins its life.
So, from a tiny grain of pollen traveling on the wind, to a secret tunnel, to a moment of fusion, and finally, this magnificent transformation into a fruit that holds the future, it's just an amazing journey. It really makes you wonder, what other incredible little factories are out there, hiding in plain sight, working miracles all around us every single day?
All right, let's talk about something we all go through. That kind of awkward, definitely confusing, and ultimately incredible biological journey that turns us from kids into adults. Yep, I'm talking about puberty. Today, we're going to break down this huge transformation and really get to grips with the biological blueprint that shapes every single one of us. I mean, we all remember growing, right? Getting taller, losing baby teeth. That's just part of getting bigger. But then, a time comes when the changes get way more complex, a lot more personal. This is about so much more than just your height. So what is puberty, really? What's actually going on inside our bodies to kick the whole thing off? To really get a handle on that question, we first need to pull apart 2 ideas that often get tangled up: the general growth that happens all through childhood and the very specific set of changes we call puberty. And trust me, they are not the same thing at all. So think of it like this. On one hand, you've got general growth. Its job is pretty simple: make the body larger. You get taller, your teeth change, you're basically just a bigger version of your younger self. But puberty, that's a completely different beast. Its mission isn't just about size, it's about transformation. Your body's whole appearance and proportions get remodeled. New features pop up, new feelings, and it's all driven by this huge surge of hormones. The end result isn't just a bigger body, it's a body that's capable of reproduction. It's a complete shift in biological priorities. Okay, so what do these transformative changes actually look like? Let's start with the things that happen to pretty much everyone, boys and girls. These are kind of the universal signs that puberty is officially kicking into gear. Right, so these are the changes that unite the whole experience. We're talking about new, thicker hair showing up in places like your armpits and the genital area. Your skin suddenly gets oilier, which, you guessed it, is why pimples suddenly become a thing. But it's not just physical. There's this huge mental shift that happens too. You develop a new awareness of your own body and of other people's bodies in a way that just wasn't there before. It's a big deal. But while some things are universal, this is where puberty splits off and follows 2 very different paths. It's all about different hormonal cocktails that lead to very unique changes. So let's look at what's different for girls and boys. First up, let's talk about the specific milestones that happen in girls, mostly orchestrated by the hormone estrogen. So for girls, there are three really key developments. Breast size starts to increase, and the nipples darken. But the most significant change of all is the start of menstruation. This monthly cycle is the clearest biological signal you can get that the body is now capable of pregnancy. It's a fundamental shift. Okay, now let's switch gears and turn our attention to the set of changes that are specific to boys, which are mainly driven by testosterone. For boys, the changes are just as distinct. You start to see facial hair coming in, the voice begins to deepen, often going through that famous, kind of unpredictable cracking phase as the voice box gets larger. And physically, the penis develops and starts to experience spontaneous erections, which are a totally normal part of maturation. Wow, okay. That is a lot of change. It sounds like a whirlwind. So you might be thinking, is puberty like flipping a switch? Do you just wake up one morning and all of this has happened? And the answer is a huge, resounding no. And this is so important. These changes do not happen all at once, and they for sure don't happen at some exact predetermined age. Puberty is a journey, not just a single event. Everybody's timeline is different. Some people start early, some start later, and the pace is different for everyone. There is no single normal schedule, and that is a really crucial thing to remember. You know, this brings us to a massive question. Why now? Why does all of this happen during our teenage years? What's the biological trigger that tells the body, okay, it's time to start this enormous project? Well, believe it or not, the biggest clue is hiding right there in the official definition of puberty. It's the period when, and this is the key phrase, as the rate of general body growth begins to slow down, the reproductive tissues start to mature. That little phrase is everything. Let's break that down, because it's actually pretty brilliant. All through childhood, your body has one main job: grow to its full adult size. That's where all the energy goes. But once that period of super fast growth starts to slow down, the body basically reassigns its resources. The new top priority on the list? Maturing the reproductive system. It's like a perfect biological handoff from one mission to the next. So now we get the timing. Let's connect the final dots. How do all these specific changes we talked about, the hair, the voice, all of it, how do they relate back to the ultimate biological purpose of this whole process? Here's the most important thing to get. None of these changes are random, not one. You should think of them as signals. Each one is a form of biological communication, basically announcing to the world that the body is becoming sexually mature. And here's exactly how it all connects. Those new hair patterns, they're external signals of maturity. For boys, the penis developing means it's now capable of the internal transfer of germ cells, or what we know as sperm. And for girls, the changes to the reproductive organs and the development of breasts are all about one thing: preparing the body for the possibility of carrying and feeding a baby. Every single change has a very specific reproductive purpose. So we've seen that puberty is this incredibly smart, carefully timed biological process that literally reshapes our bodies for adulthood. But these changes go so far beyond just biology, don't they? They affect how we see ourselves, how other people see us, and how we start to navigate the world as new people. So the final question I want to leave you with is this. If puberty is the biological blueprint, how does it actually shape the unique person each of us becomes?
Today, we're going to take a look at a biological system that's, well, part factory, part command center, and part delivery service. And it's all happening on an unbelievably tiny microscopic scale. So you've got this system that's in charge of creating and moving the very seeds of life. But how does all this complex machinery actually work? Let's break it down and trace the whole journey right from the very beginning. You know, when you boil it all down, this whole system really has two main missions. Just two. It's all about production and delivery. Yep, that's it. The entire mission is a two-step plan. First, you've got to produce these super important germ cells. You know them as sperm. And second, you've got to deliver them where they need to go. Simple, right? Make them and deliver them. That's the game plan.
Okay, so it only makes sense to start right at the beginning, doesn't it? Let's head to the production factory. This is where those all-important germ cells are actually made.
And that factory? Well, that's the testes. These organs are basically a super specialized site, totally dedicated to one thing: making sperm. This is ground zero. Everything gets started right here.
But you know, this brings up a kind of interesting point. The testes are located outside the main body cavity, which, if you think about it, seems like a pretty vulnerable place for something so important, right? So why? Well, there's a really good reason for this setup.
And the answer, believe it or not, comes down to one simple thing: temperature. See, making sperm is a delicate process. It just doesn't work at our normal core body temperature. It needs to be a little bit cooler. So by hanging out outside the main body, the testes get to stay at that perfect, slightly lower temperature needed to get the job done.
Now, a factory like this can't just run itself, right? It needs a manager, someone giving orders. It needs a chemical commander to run the whole show. And that's where a super important hormone steps in.
And that hormone is testosterone. What's kind of cool is that it's actually made right there in the testes, the very factory it's in charge of. And its job as the boss, well, it goes way beyond just making sperm.
So testosterone is a multitasker. It's got two main jobs on its plate. Job number 1, manage the day-to-day business of making sperm. Job number 2, it's the chemical switch that flips on all those changes we see in boys during puberty. It's pretty incredible, really, that just one chemical can be in charge of two such huge different things.
Okay, so the product is made. The sperm exists. Now what? How does it get from the factory floor all the way to the finish line? Well, this is where the delivery phase begins, and trust me, it's a whole journey in itself.
All right, so once they're ready to go, the sperm are shipped out of the testes through this long tube called the vas deferens. You can pretty much think of it as the main highway leading out of the factory town. But here's the thing: they don't travel light, and they don't travel alone. Along this highway, they make a couple of really important pit stops. Glands. You've got the prostate and the seminal vesicles. They jump in and add their own special secretions into the mix.
And this fluid is absolutely essential for two big reasons. First, it basically turns the sperm into a liquid, which makes it way easier for them to travel. And second, it's packed with nutrition. Think of it like a packed lunch. It's the fuel they're going to need for the long trip ahead.
Eventually, this highway, the vas deferens, merges with the urethra. And this is a really neat bit of biological design. Talk about efficiency. The urethra becomes a shared road, a common passage for both sperm and, at other times, urine.
So, we've talked about the factory, and we've mapped out the delivery route. Now it's time to zoom way in. Let's get a close-up look at the star of this whole show, that tiny microscopic messenger that this entire system is built around. So what is a sperm cell when you get right down to it? Well, it's basically a tiny little package. Its main job is to carry genetic material, and it comes with its own motor, a long tail that's built for one thing and one thing only: to move.
The design is super simple, but incredibly effective. You've got the head, which is like the cargo hold, carrying all that precious genetic information, and then you have the tail. That's the engine, the motor, that's going to push the whole thing forward.
And that engine has a very clear mission. The one and only job of that long tail is to propel the sperm, to get it moving towards its final destination, the female germ cell.
So there it is, a whole complex system of manufacturing, management, and transportation, and it's all built to make sure this one single tiny cell can finish its mission. It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? What does this amazing level of biological engineering tell us about the sheer ingenuity that's woven into the very blueprint of life itself?
Today, we're diving into one of the most incredible journeys in all of biology. It's a 9-month epic that actually begins with a single microscopic cell. It's really a story about precision, timing, and this amazing transformation that happens inside the female body, month after month. So you have to wonder, right? How does a whole 9-month journey, something so huge, start from something so small? What kicks this entire incredible process into gear? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack. And it all starts with the hero of our story, the egg. So first up, let's talk about the system's blueprint. Before we can follow the egg on its big adventure, we really need to get the lay of the land, you know? Let's map out all the key players, the organs involved in this whole process. So, what's on our map? We've got the ovaries, the oviduct, which you probably know as the fallopian tube, the uterus, the vagina, and the cervix. Each one of these is a super critical stop or pathway on the journey we're about to trace. Everything, and I mean everything, begins right here, in the ovaries. You can think of these as the main production centers. Not only do they create and store all the eggs, but they're also like little hormone factories, basically running the entire monthly cycle. Okay, next up is the fallopian tube. This is a really delicate, thin tube, but it's the crucial pathway that connects the ovary to the uterus. And it's not just a passageway. This is the spot. This is where the life-changing moment of fertilization can actually happen. And the final destination on that path is the uterus, also known as the womb. I mean, this thing is an incredible, elastic, and nurturing environment. It's perfectly designed to house, protect, and support a developing embryo for 9 whole months. Okay, so now we've got our map. Let's meet our main character. We're going to focus now on the egg itself. And honestly, the mind-blowing potential it holds right from the very beginning. This fact is just wow. A girl is born with all the eggs she will ever have. Thousands of them just sitting there in reserve from day one. It's literally a lifetime supply of potential just waiting for the right moment. And then puberty hits, and that changes everything. The whole system kind of wakes up. Each month, out of those thousands of eggs, one is chosen. It gets to mature and is then released to start its very own journey. Okay, next up, the path to the uterus. We've got a mature egg, it's ready to go, and now the active part of its journey begins. Let's follow its monthly trip toward that final destination. So this monthly journey follows a really precise 3-step rhythm. First, the egg matures inside the ovary. Then, boom, it's released. That's the moment we call ovulation. And finally, it starts its travel down the fallopian tube. It's this perfectly timed sequence, every single month. This brings us to what is, without a doubt, the most critical turning point in the egg's entire journey. This is it. This is the moment where its ultimate fate is decided, a moment of total transformation. So during sex, sperm enter the system and they start their own quest, traveling up towards those fallopian tubes. And if the timing is just right, they might just run into the egg that's been released. And right here, the path splits. It's a real fork in the road with 2 totally different outcomes. If a sperm fertilizes the egg, it becomes what's called a zygote, starts dividing, and then tries to implant in the uterus to grow. But if fertilization doesn't happen, the egg and the uterine lining are just shed, and the body gets ready to start the whole cycle over again next month. Now, for a pregnancy to actually begin, this next step is absolutely everything. That tiny little embryo has to successfully implant itself into the wall of the uterus. The body is already way ahead of the game here. It's built up this thick, blood-rich lining, basically creating the perfect welcoming home. So, once that implantation is successful, the mission isn't over. Not even close. In fact, it's really just beginning. The focus now shifts to this long-term 9-month mission of development and growth. And to support this mission, the body develops a brand new temporary organ, which is just amazing. It's called the placenta. It's this special disc-like tissue that connects to the uterine wall and acts as the ultimate life support system between the mother and the embryo. The placenta is basically a super sophisticated 2-way street. It delivers all the good stuff, like glucose and oxygen, from the mother to the embryo, and then, going in the other direction, it carries waste products away from the embryo to be disposed of. It's just a perfect little exchange system. And this whole incredible mission, going from a tiny cluster of cells to a fully formed baby, it all happens over the course of about 9 months. And that brings us to the final act, the grand finale. This is the culmination of that entire 9-month journey, the moment of birth. So, over these 9 months, that initial little ball of cells goes through an unbelievable transformation. The embryo grows, it develops all its organs, and becomes a fetus, getting ready for life on the outside. And finally, the journey reaches its conclusion. The powerful muscles of the uterus begin these rhythmic contractions, guiding the child out into the world and completing a process that all started with just a single hopeful cell. So, there you have it. From one cell to a new life, it's a process of just breathtaking precision. When you really think about this journey from start to finish, you can't help but be amazed. What does this microscopic miracle make you wonder about?
Hey everyone. So, every single month, our bodies go through this really complex, kind of fascinating biological process. Today, we're going to dive into what happens when the body does all this amazing prep work for a pregnancy that just doesn't happen. So, what does happen? I mean, that's the big question, right? Think of it like this. Your body spends all this time and energy getting a guest room ready for a super important visitor. It's perfect, it's welcoming, but then the visitor just doesn't show up.
What now? That's the story we're going to get into.
Okay, so it all kicks off with what you could call a monthly countdown. And this whole cycle gets started by just one single, really crucial event.
And here it is. One. Just one. Every month, an ovary releases a single egg. And that one little action, that's basically the starting pistol for the whole race.
But, the ovary isn't working on its own here. As soon as that egg is released, it sends out a hormonal signal. It's kind of like a text message, really, to the other major player in this story, the uterus. The uterus gets that text and goes, okay, time to get ready.
So what does getting ready actually look like for the uterus? Let's zoom in a bit and check out exactly what changes to get things prepped for a potential fertilized egg. It's basically a two-step process. First, the inner lining of the uterus gets nice and thick. Then, for step 2, it becomes really spongy and full of blood vessels. It's like a quick 2-part renovation project to make the place as cozy as possible.
And why go through all that trouble? Well, that guest room analogy we talked about, it fits perfectly. The whole point is to make that uterine lining super soft, full of nutrients, and just generally welcoming. It's got to be the perfect spot for a fertilized egg to settle in and start growing.
And this is the key thing to remember. The body isn't just doing this for fun. That thick, spongy lining would be absolutely essential for nourishing an embryo. But, and this is a big but, only if fertilization actually happened. The body is just being a really good planner, It's getting ready just in case.
Okay, but here's where we get to the real turning point in the story. Everything we've talked about, all that careful prep work for the uterine lining, it all hinges on a very, very short timeline. The clock is officially ticking. And this timeline is super simple, but it's absolutely critical. From the moment the egg is released, a 24-hour countdown begins. And once those 24 hours are up, that's it. The window of opportunity slams shut. If that egg isn't fertilized in that time, its part in the story is over.
Yeah, that's the main takeaway right there. Just one day. That's the entire window for fertilization each month. After that, the mission for that particular egg is, well, complete.
All right, so the 24-hour window is closed, the egg wasn't fertilized. So what does that mean for that beautifully prepared uterine lining? What happens to our guest room now? Well, to put it simply, it's not needed anymore. The guest never arrived, so the room is just sitting there, empty. The body is smart, it recognizes that this elaborate lining is now extra for this cycle.
So, without the right hormonal signals to keep it in place, the body starts a cleanup process. That lining begins to slowly break down, and then it makes its way out of the body through the vagina as a mix of blood and mucus.
This whole cycle we've been talking about, the buildup and then the shedding of the lining, it actually has a formal biological name.
And that name is menstruation. It's just the official term for this cycle that happens roughly every month, where that uterine lining breaks down and comes out as blood and mucus. It's really the final step of the whole process we just walked through.
Now what about this number, 2 to 8? What does that mean? Well, that's how many days menstruation, that shedding phase, usually lasts, typically somewhere between 2 and 8 days. So, if you zoom out and look at the big picture, what we're really seeing is a monthly reset button. It's the body's incredibly efficient way to just clean the slate, get everything back to the starting point, and get ready to do it all over again next month. It's all about making sure it's always ready for what could happen.
It's a pretty intricate monthly reset, right? And it's such a powerful reminder of how much our bodies rely on cycles. Things like our sleep-wake cycles, all those hormonal shifts. It kind of makes you wonder what other cycles are constantly working behind the scenes to keep our bodies in balance.
Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to talk about something that's, well, a fundamental part of life, reproductive health. It's all about making informed choices, right? So let's dive in and really break down what you need to know. So let's just jump right in with the big question that really sits at the heart of this whole conversation. Are the body and the mind truly ready at the same time? I mean, just because someone's body is physically maturing, does that automatically mean their mind is prepared for all the huge responsibilities that can come with it? That's the real challenge we're going to unpack today.
All right, so let's get into it. Our first section, the question of readiness. We're going to be navigating all those pressures that come along with sexual maturation. Okay, so this is a really, really important point to grasp. Sexual maturation, it's a slow burn. It's a gradual process, and it's happening while the rest of the body is still growing. And maybe even more importantly, while the mind is still developing too. Think about it. Those two timelines, they're not always in sync. Just because one is happening, it's no guarantee the other is ready.
And this is where things get complicated. You've got all these external pressures creating a massive balancing act. I mean, how are you supposed to make a personal choice when you're being pulled in a million different directions? You've got your friends pressuring you, maybe your family has certain expectations about marriage and kids, and then government agencies might be sending a totally opposite message. It's a lot to handle, for sure.
Okay, moving on from social pressures, let's talk about the direct health side of things. Section 2, Sex and Your Health. This is all about understanding the potential consequences.
So, at its core, the sexual act is an incredibly intimate connection, right? And because of that physical closeness, it also means that diseases can be transmitted. It's a direct pathway, which, naturally brings us to the topic of sexually transmitted diseases. When we talk about sexually transmitted diseases, they generally get broken down into two main types. On one hand, you have bacterial infections, things like gonorrhea and syphilis. And on the other hand, you've got viral infections. That includes things like warts and, of course, HIV, which is the virus that causes AIDS.
So, what can you do about it? Well, what about prevention? One of the most common and effective tools out there is the condom. And it's pretty cool because it does two jobs at once. It's a physical barrier that helps stop a lot of STDs from being transmitted, and at the same time, it's also a contraceptive, meaning it helps prevent pregnancy.
And that brings us right to the other massive health consideration here, pregnancy. I mean, we have to be real about this. Pregnancy makes major demands on a woman's body and her mind. It's a huge undertaking. And the bottom line is, if she's not ready for it, her own health can really be adversely affected.
So if being ready is so important, what are the options for managing these choices? That's where contraception comes in. Let's take a look at the methods for avoiding pregnancy.
All right, so contraceptive methods can be broken down into a few main categories. First up, you've got mechanical barriers. Super straightforward. They physically block sperm from reaching the egg. Think condoms or vaginal coverings. Then there are hormonal methods, like birth control pills. These work by changing the body's hormones to stop an egg from being released in the first place. But it's worth noting they can come with side effects. Next, we have IUDs, or intrauterine devices. These are little devices placed in the uterus to prevent pregnancy, things like the loop or copper T. They can sometimes cause irritation, though. And finally, for a more permanent solution, there are surgical methods.
So let's look a little closer at those surgical options. There are procedures for both men and women. For guys, it's called a vasectomy. Basically, the vas deferens, that's the tube that sperm travels through, is blocked. For women, it's called tubal ligation, where the fallopian tube gets blocked, so the egg can't make its way to the uterus. For both, the goal is the same, to prevent fertilization from ever happening.
Now, a super important note here. While these surgeries are generally considered safe, we have to remember that any surgery comes with risks. If the procedure isn't done properly, there's always a chance of infection or other complications.
Okay, so we've talked about personal health, but these choices, they don't just exist in a vacuum. They have this huge ripple effect on society as a whole. So let's zoom out and look at that bigger picture. And this brings us to a really serious and challenging topic. Medical surgery can obviously be used for good, but it can also be misused. A critical example of this is the illegal practice of sex-selective abortion, specifically of female fetuses, and this has absolutely massive consequences.
So, what are those consequences? Well, for a society to be healthy and stable, you really need a balanced sex ratio between males and females. But this reckless practice of female foticide is causing a really alarming drop in the number of girls in some parts of the world. It's gotten so serious that to fight it, prenatal sex determination has actually been outlawed in some places.
And all of this ties into a much, much bigger debate. What's the real reason for poor living standards? You've got two major schools of thought here. First, there's the population argument. The idea is that as the population grows and grows, it puts a huge strain on resources, making it harder for anyone to have a better life. But then you have the inequality argument. This side says, hey, wait a minute, the size of the population isn't the real problem. The problem is that our society is unequal and resources aren't shared fairly.
So, that leaves us with one final and pretty powerful question to think about. When you look around at the world, what do you think is the most important reason for poor living standards? Is it just that there are too many people, or is it more about how our societies are structured and the inequality within them? It's a complex one for sure. Definitely something to chew on. Thanks so much for joining me today.